Welcome to another iteration of Not on the Radio. I'm very happy to be here with WA Mathieu, composer, pianist, artist, poet, educator, wonderful human being. It's good to be here with you, man. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for doing this. What you been up to, man?
Oh my gosh. Same old, but older, as we can say. I'm mostly, I teach for a living, so I teach a couple students a day. And I'm composing as usual, and amazingly, the composition just keeps rolling through, gets better as it goes along, I'm glad to say. That's my ideal for an artist, to keep blooming outward, keep going. So Mendelssohn, no. Beethoven, yes. You just see the Picasso, yes. Stravinsky, yes. You just see the art keep getting wider and
keep going.
Keep going, and I think God lets composers get old so they can write string quartets. So
I wanted to ask you because I remember you mentioned that's what you're focusing on, are string quartets
right now. I finished my second one, which will be premiered by the Telegraph Quartet in fall of 2018, and the first one was recorded by the Galax a couple years ago, and I'm just into string quartets, but I'm also into piano music. I have a student, Noam Lemish, who's playing my stuff, and I just recorded Magic Clavier books 1 and 2. Book 1 has been out. Book 2 is coming. Magic Clavier is about modal modulation. You know all about it. And or it's actually about the magic mode is what you can get away with in a single key, and like as follows. I'm in C, folks. In a single key. Well, that's book 1, piece in every key, and then book 2 is that, but it starts to modulate around, first just a little bit, and then more and more and more and more, till finally at the end of the long hour, you're going 6 sharps up, 6 sharps back.
And the music is out, but not is the like the written music, the notation out?
Oh, it's all, that's available too.
Very cool.
It's all set up in Finale.
Okay. What would you say is sort of the fundamental misunderstanding musicians have about, I guess, harmony, or like where are what is the blind spot you see?
That's a good question.
Because, what is lacking? What should be general knowledge in the musician population that isn't?
Be curious to know what you have to say about this.
Well, I have ideas, but I'm more curious what you have to say.
Truth in the press here. This guy was my student for a long time. A really good one. One of the few who really did understand the whole harmonic paradigm that I've set up. In my book, Harmonic Experience.
It's a good book. It's a fantastic book. I'm still hanging with that book, man. I'll probably hang with that book the rest of my life.
Andy Neely gave it a shout out. Oh, you told me about that. Yeah, it's cool. So anyway, the biggest problem, the biggest pedagogical misfortune is that harmonic events are given melodic names. Now that wouldn't seem terribly problematic. It's just as though, however, you would describe your relationships with people by how far away they are from you at any given moment. So for instance, your relationship with your mother would be so 3.5 miles, but later on in the afternoon it would be 10 inches, right? This is not a really clear description of that relationship. Or with the woman you love would be at this point about 25 miles away, but later on this evening. So it's just not really a good way of describing how things relate, and yet we say things are a major sixth apart or a minor sixth. We give them, we think of them in terms of their melodic distance, and which makes an octave quite a leap. Now, there's also an obviousness that octaves are perfect and fifths are perfect and fourths are perfect, but the damage done by thinking interval's a bad name in my pedagogy. The damage done by thinking interval has never really been purged from the pedagogy, from the way people think about music. The only true name for two notes in relationship is their ratio. This is a 2 to 1. That's a 3 to 2. That's a 4 to 3. This is a 5 to 4. You learn it by the overtone series and by the reciprocal of that, where you turn it upside down. And in that way, you learn how notes actually do relate, how they sit in our minds and ears and brains, how we decode things like this and things like this and things like this, especially when they're more in tune than in a modern piano. So that's not fully appreciated, and the teaching by interval is very, very difficult to overcome. So, I mean, this is what my book is about, and this is what a lot of modern teachers now are trying to overcome. But it's sort of so ingrained in the way that we talk about music that it's a problem. And another thing is when people learn to improvise, there's so much emphasis on root and not enough emphasis on tonic. That also seems sort of trivial, but it's not trivial at all.
Sure.
Because if I'm a jazz musician and I'm playing 2-5-1 like that, I'm taught that I play a D Dorian scale, a G mixolydian scale there, and a C major scale there, and much of the time, or at least they sometimes say second mode of C, fifth mode of C. That's more modern paradigm. That's less toxic. But what actually is true is that you're in C the whole time, and if you have things going on like this, that's still in C. It's just that it's in C minor, that it's in C Phrygian with 2/7, and then it's in C major. So to understand that that's really in one key, that's the way the ear hears it. You couldn't say 2, 5, flat 2, flat 7, 1, and things like that, unless they were in relationship to something, which is more intervallic talk, incidentally. But still, obviously, 2 is 2 of something. The truth is that the ear hears that in C. It's 2 in 1. It's 2 in the key of C, or it's 4 in the key of C. It's 5 in the key of C. And so, to fully appreciate that is really what my teaching is about. My harmonic teaching is about. That you really learn all the possibilities in one key. You learn the entire modal panoply in one key, which is what Magic Clavier attempts to show as musically as possible. But like its namesake, the Well-Tempered Clavier in Bach, where he writes, 96 beautiful pieces, but they demonstrate the qualities of the keys. That was the original purpose. So my music demonstrates the power of being in one key and being able to take full advantage of the entire modal system, from so-called Lydian to so-called Phrygian and every mixture in between.
I was when I first became aware of ratios in regards to musical tones, I was so upset that it had not been presented earlier. I couldn't believe it, And so now, like in my teaching, like if I'm dealing with this, I'm teaching kids, but if I've got a student who's interested in improvising or obviously has a sense, I introduce it right away. Even little kids, I'll introduce the idea of 2 to 1.
I can die in peace.
Good.
I had a really nice mom and a really generous, nice dad. They're educated people. I had a great bringing up with the, the issues and the traumas that are usual in humans, and a very mediocre but standard, upper middle class music education. And I went to college, and I was taught the things that you learn in college. Mm-hmm. And as I matured as a musician in my 20s and then came to California from the Midwest, from Chicago and Cincinnati, and met more globally oriented musicians, Pandit Pranath, my guru, and Terry Riley, my mentor, and many other people who were involved in the music of the world. And I started to learn theory as it is heard and understood by the heart rather than the way I was taught it. I became angrier and angrier and angrier that it took so frigging long to understand the way the ear actually hears. But look, blame Aristotle, blame Pope Gregory, blame the greed for territory and power. We were taught Aristotelian, Pythagorean theory. In the Middle Ages. That's what survived because what was literate is survived, not what musicians did. There was no recording, but what was written down. And so the theories that were perpetuated to modern times originated in Greece, went through our own Middle Ages and our own Middle Age monks and church writings, and so we're stuck with the modes that go. Oh, shit. That's the modal system. That ain't it, folks. That's not the way to learn it. The way to learn is this is Lydian, this is Ionian, this is Mixolydian, this is a Dorian, this is Ionian, this is Phrygian, plus all the mixes in between. And that's the way they teach it in India, and have been teaching it for thousands of years, probably thousands. We know for sure 1,000. And that's the way the ear hears it. But our music got very complex, and like all modern life, when you get more civilized, more complex, you lose something. You lose your roots. That's what a lot of modern life is. A lot of sensitive people and people with developed sensibilities don't want to lose their ancient knowledge. And so that's kind of what I'm doing, is I'm trying to preserve that ancient dronal way of hearing up through our own complexities, so that basically you don't lose the use of your legs when you fly airplanes. It's important not to forget about walking when you get into cars and planes. You have to keep your legs, and in the same way, you have to keep your sensibilities of what's really in tune when you're playing things like this.
Yeah, the idea of the ear just being able to locate the center and playing with that. I mean, can you split your ear and hear two tonal centers at once? Can you?
Well, that's a good question. Can you?
I can make something be the center just through accentuating that sound, even if that sound is like nails on a chalkboard. If like there's enough gravity on it, and
that's right.
You know, then all of a sudden that becomes the orientation.
What I tell people is that you take all the pots and pans in your kitchen, you hang them up, and you start beating on them, and then you take your vacuum sweeper, which is really loud, and you turn it on. Right, it's going right. And so, what key is this whole cacophony in? Answer: it's in the key of the vacuum sweeper, because that's the loudest thing, right? The closest bitonality that I can get to is in some Indian modes, and they have really developed that. When you, like, if you go, no, no.
That's fun though.
It's fun, but there were experiments about that in the 20s and 30s in this country. There was a lot of it's not there, but it's not really satisfying. The thing that's really, to me anyway, the thing that is, so I'm in C, there's a mode in raga called marwa, right, which is so I'm singing it in such a way that it's clearly in C, but the notes are, and they make the tonic oh, say, can you see? You know, so you get an A pentatonic scale out of it, and then you sort of think you're in A, and then the singer or the player stops for a second and says, oh, that's the tonic. Is what? So they really make a thing out of that, and it's beautiful. And there are many modes, many rocks that do that. They tilt the tonality so that when you hear the tonic, it's like, whoa, what? But that's been going on all along. So I use that as a touchstone. Actually, that's a very, very, very good. That stretches modality right to its limit, and it's very, very beautiful when to use it as a means of tension and release in music. To be simple about it, in this rock, this would be the C-ish aspect of marwa. But if I go, well, they call it re, it's really C sharp. Am I in A? Right?
You almost get to, you can choose to, if you
can tilt your ear like this, and that's very cool.
Yeah, it is cool.
But it's not.
Yeah, it's not just compounding.
You just don't do one thing on one key and one thing on another key. That's kind of doesn't work so well.
It's too obvious there.
Yeah.
It's just too obvious. What about I don't know, what do you have to say to, like, I don't know, musicians my age who are like in their 20s and they're almost 30 and, like, I don't know, are like sincere.
I thought you were in your late 50s.
I'm getting there.
I'm getting there, man. Got some wisdom on you.
But what, what do you have to say to young musicians, or just, I don't know, musicians who are sincere and are trying to make sense of doing music in this climate of time? I mean, if you had to impart any advice, or I don't know, beware.
Get a day job.
I got mine already, man.
My day job is teaching, and I've been teaching forever, since I was 16, actually. I started to take students, and teaching has been very, very kind to me, and you can come study with me right now, because it allows me to live the life I want to live, which is to write the music that I want to write and play the music that I want to play, apart from the vicissitudes of the culture and the necessities of economic survival. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that I don't listen to the culture. I listen to the culture a lot. I mean, I'm plugged in, more or less, as much as an 81-year-old dude can be plugged in.
There's no Wi-Fi in this room, is there?
Yes, there is.
Oh, there is. That's great.
Well, sure. I mean, I'm into the. I'm wired up as I can be, I suppose. But it's difficult. It's increasingly difficult, especially since the internet. Well, actually, since TV, since radio, TV, internet, social media. Yeah. And it's going to get even wider. I mean, you can be able to plug into any human pretty much in your brain pretty soon, within the century anyhow. And so we're one being. And to find your own, it's good to be one being. It's also as potentially good as it is potentially toxic and dangerous and fatal.
If you got a bad seed in there, I mean,
as we can plainly see, only so plainly see. It's increasingly difficult to find your own voice, your own solitude and your own voice. And it's especially difficult when you're learning music, because how do we learn? We learn by mimicry. I sat in front of my guru for 25 years singing what he sang. Little brown man on a blanket, he's singing, and I'm imitating him as if my life depended on it, because my life did depend on it, and does. You know, I learned so much just by, and you know, in a good spiritual relationship, you discover your own spirituality through your guru, through your teacher. And that's true in music too. A really good teacher, you imitate your teacher because that's the way you learn. You shouldn't be afraid to imitate your teacher. But at the same time, don't let anyone claim you. You can't be claimed. The culture can't claim you. No person can claim you. No style can claim you. You have to find out what is actually yours to give. How do you find out what's yours to give? You imitate everybody. You know, you find out what works and what does not work. Everyone's mostly a pastiche of everything we've ever heard. And at the same time, we have our own contribution. The fingerprints, those are ours, right? And the spacing between the eyes, whatever, you know. I mean, everyone has their own idiosyncratic character, and that's true of one's voice. And the trick in music, the advice I give is never take your eye off of that bead to find your own voice. And it's okay to, you know, try to play like Miles Davis, or to try to play cello like Yo-Yo Ma, or whomever is your idol at the time. But there is a self, and the problem with having to make a living in music is that you sell yourself. That's how you make a living. So I haven't put out my begging bowl. I don't write grants. I accept them if I want to do the project, you know, but I don't accept them if I don't want to do the project. And pretty much the way I have my own record company and a producing company, and I pretty much pick the musicians that I want to play my music and who are eager and willing to play it. And that's how I proceeded. So I feel very completed in my work, and nobody knows who I am. But through books and music, I have enough students to live. So that's the way I've carved it out. You know, there are people in the world I see who are really successful arrangers and really happy in the culture to make hit tunes, and that's good. Do what you want.
If it's right for them.
If it's right for them, it's right. You know, I've always been a kind of a lone wolf, and tried to find my own way of making music. And words are horrible.
Yeah, it's how you laid out radio to television to social media to microchips in the brain. Like I've been trying to put more of my music like on these social media things, you know, and continually doing that and getting responses and getting love and getting hate. I was told to, you know, people are pretty mean, you know, but I think it's good. I think mean, I don't know, I'm happy when when the music sort of stirs the pot, and I don't know. I don't want to like provoke a reaction, but I do. You know, I want to have a response. Um, can you talk to us a little bit about like your 20s? And I mean, weren't you were hanging with some cool cats, man? And
I was lucky. I went to the University of Chicago when I was 17 as an early entrant, and at that time it was sort of red flagged. It was thought of as a communist school, and it couldn't. That's because it had a lot of liberal professors with communist background. Because in the 30s, communism was like a liberal intellectual thing, especially with Jews, but with the country generally. And then communism turned out to be definitely not what those people thought it was going to be. And instead of being a promise for the liberation of the people, it turned out to be all too easy to be taken over by despots and national terrorists. And that's so you had countries that were very aggressive and powerful, greedy countries that killed their citizens by the millions, and that was communism. And so there was the Red Scare. But at the time, the University of Chicago was a very liberal, open place, and it couldn't get students because I'm not going to send my child to a communist school. And I mean, I went through that school for 4 years, and we read Marx and Engels, but we never discussed communism, except as just a form of democracy. There was no communist leading. It was just a very open intellectual place. So I got a good education. By the time I got out of there, I could write a little bit, and I could think a little bit, thanks to having to take my philosophy courses over several times in some cases. And I did a senior tutorial on changes of jazz style, which really honed my ability to be a critic and a writer, to be able to describe music. And I had Leonard Meyer as a teacher, and Bill Russo, who had just come off the Kenton Band and was a good jazz arranger. He was young. He was 27. I was 17. But, you know, he was famous, and I was in awe. And all I wanted to do was write for Stan Kenton and get an education. And that's what I did. And I was lucky. I went with Kenton, and I got a record out of it in a year. It's called Standards and Silhouette. Look it up, folks. It's a good record. It's arrangements of standard tunes played by the Kenton Band. And it was a great band at the time. And Charlie Mariano's on there. He saves the record. And really, Rolf Erickson is on it. It's a beautiful recording. And my charts. And then I got a job writing for Downbeat magazine. I was 22. And then I'd been at the university. I was playing intermission piano at the Compass Theater, which was the precursor of the Second City. The Second City started it was in rehearsal when I got off the Kenton Band. After a year on the Kenton Band, they said, "Come, we need a musical director." So I became a musical director of the Second City, the first one in 1959, and of course that became a national paradigm. Actually, I can go to a movie and tell you what beats were improvised and what games they were playing to make the scene. And I was just in the middle of all that stuff. And then there was free jazz, and I started to play free jazz with my buddy George Morris in Chicago, who's I've been playing with ever since. He's out here now. We're neighbors, basically, making records together with Jennifer Wilsey, his wife. And we have a trio called The Bloom. Check it out, folks. And that was all happening in 1960, in the 60s. And I had this job at the Second City, which didn't take up that much time. And I met Easley Blackwood, who was at the university, who was a highly trained, very eccentric, but extremely gifted composer. And I apprenticed to him. And I learned Eurocentric music that way. I learned figured bass, and I learned all those pieces, and I learned all those models, and it allowed me to siphon what I wanted to from my love of Bach and Beethoven and Brahms and Mozart. And then through my 20s, I discovered Indian music. I discovered Albert Ayler, and I discovered Cecil Taylor. And I was writing for Downbeat, so I had access to these people, the jazz people. And I continued to study and write serious chamber music and write a lot of theater music. And I was really lucky. I survived a first unfortunate marriage, and I was free. I was single. I had my time free to be with the people I wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I was profligate and very, very studious. I practiced 6 hours a day. I mean, period.
Yeah.
And that's it. And went to the gig and found somebody to come home with and got stoned and got up and practiced 6 hours a day and went to the theater and just kept going on like that. And I was prolific. I wrote a lot of stuff. And because I was famous as a jazz writer and as the co-founder of this theater, co-founding member of this theater, Second City, and as a did I say a writer for Downbeat? So I had this sort of national exposure, and I felt that I was cheating people because I didn't really know. I didn't really have a grip on it. I was just young, Jewish, aggressive, and you know, creative, but not deep. And so I felt that my real calling was, I was lucky because I had enough money and I had enough of fame. And, we took a show on Broadway, Second City. So I was on Broadway when I was 23 or 4, you know. And it was just really, really, really unsatisfying because I didn't think I knew my stuff. So I spent 10 years just in deep study. The Boulanger basses and learning to be a pianist, trying to play. You'd never know it now. I'm out of practice, folks. Composing too much. And came to California when I was 30 and met all these blessed, fabulous people out here, including Terry Riley and Pandit Pranav and the Sufis. I became a Sufi disciple and later on a Sufi teacher. And that was a whole nother story from the Midwest. And the deepening that I had sought was then presented to me. My life opened up. And I started to meditate and study Buddhism and just compose, and practice, and teach. I've been doing that out here in California since I was 30, and that's 50 years, and I've been in the same spot here. You should pan around so people
That's
can
beautiful.
see.
Well, maybe it's the...
So I've been very, very, very lucky, but part of the reason is because I've had my fame, and I feel that I'm what Virginia Woolf calls authentically obscure. I've earned my obscurity.
Right on.
I've earned every moment of my obscurity because I've worked hard, and I do have talent, and I've taught hard too, and I've learned a great deal by teaching. As you obviously know.
It's very fun to well, first of all, I started getting piano students. Then I'm like, I got to step up my piano game. So then I started studying piano more intently, not just for harm and like theory and composing, but actually learning pieces, etc. And and just teaching this material, you get better at it, or you see it in different ways. Especially when the kid has an aha, and you sort of see what.
That's beautiful. And what if the kid who has an aha is a professional musician and is 50 years old and suddenly sees something? That's very satisfying when you're the teacher. You know.
Yeah, it is.
It's very satisfying.
I bet. So, I mean, you mentioned Sufism.
Sufism.
Right. Okay. How does your spiritual life? Do you want to talk about that? Can we talk about the inner world, or
the inner world? No, Jacob. Sure.
How does it inform your music? How does your spiritual inner life inform your creative work and your
Good question. I'll cut to the chase. In my 20s and when people are young and usually in their 20s, they begin to see that life is more than their sense of themselves, that they're part of a larger picture, and they get more and more curious, and and some of us embark on what's called a spiritual life, or they're looking at their inner life. They want to know what's beyond their own ego and also their own capacity to understand. And that goes on and on. Here's the cutting to the chase. There's a point at which your spiritual practice and your spiritual lexicon, your language for it, your concepts about what spirituality is, your accumulated experience of spiritual activity just simply falls away. It becomes indistinguishable from living life. Mm-hmm. There's no difference between inner life and outer life, ideally. Mm-hmm. That's the Buddhist definition, so to speak. I mean, it's a Buddhist way of looking at a realized person. There's only one life, mm-hmm. and I'm living it right now, and we're talking.
Here we are.
Here we are. And that's the inner life. You want to know the inner life? That's the inner life. You want to know the inner life? You want to know the inner life? It's time to feed the cat.
I was hanging out with the inner life the other night, and I had a lattice in front of me, mm-hmm. and I was playing in D and why don't we show the lattice?
What is a lattice?
What is a lattice?
You just show it.
So this is a lattice of harmonic space.
That's a lattice of notes, tones. Yeah, lattice of tones.
Lattice of tones, and then on the flip side, we've got a lattice of chords,
where the tones come in packages called triads. So,
right. So we sort of zoomed out, and going north in major thirds, south, and how would you describe south? South as
major thirds reciprocally.
Reciprocal major thirds, not minor sixes, right? Or
no no need.
Yeah.
Major thirds up, C, E, G sharp. Major thirds down, C, A flat, F flat, and then going east-west, more or less east-west, is perfect fifth, C, G, D, A, and
the reciprocally,
C, F, B flat, E flat, and that's all you need, folks. Yeah. That's all you need.
It's a hell of a map, and I was hanging with this map, mm-hmm. and I went from here to here to here to here, mm-hmm. and I was just
pointing like to C to E to B to F sharp. No, to D sharp.
To D sharp. And I was convinced that I was hearing it as an augmented second. Like it was an augmented.
Well, that because you were hearing you were on the bitonal cusp.
I guess so.
Yeah, but that's in my book. That's the edge. That's the thing. Is this a bridge too far? Can we really hear D sharp in the key of C? Because that's a lot of harmony. Yeah. And it gets confused in temperament. It gets confused with E flat. But I can't. I have to have an E that's in tune. I don't here because it's tempered. But if I had a really true C major chord or C major 7, you could get the D sharp to happen, no problem. But ultimately, I know I'm interrupting.
Oh, sorry.
Ultimately, there's no truth out there. There's no truth of harmonic theory. That's why my book is called Harmonic Experience. Mm-hmm. It's what you hear that's true. It's what you hear that's true.
Right on.
But what you hear that's true changes over time. It might change over 5 minutes. It might change over 5 seconds. But it's pretty sure bet that it's going to change over 5 years. And I'll bet you billions to a dime that it changes over 50 years. And that's what you have to keep looking at. How do I hear this? What key do I think I'm in? Is this beautiful or ugly? Is this complex or simple? I don't like dissonance. I don't like dissonance and consonants. I use that as little as possible. Is this complicated or simple? How am I feeling the breath or the metabolism of this phrase? That's going to keep changing as you absorb more experience and you wade through humanity more and more years, and as your sensibilities become more keen and your capacity becomes greater, your taste changes. You hear more, and you write music which is different, and you make music which is different. So styles evolve. That's what I was saying about Beethoven and Picasso. You just love those people who keep going like that. Mendelssohn's best music. Mendelssohn wrote really great music when he was 17, and it's undistinguishable from the music he wrote when he was 30. You know, it's this wonderful composer, but he froze. Mozart showed signs of freezing, but then when his dad died, and he started studying with Haydn, his music started to become more contrapuntal, which it hadn't been. And by the time he was toward the end of his life, alas, it was 33 or 34, his music just opened up. And it was fabulous. And so, you know, you wish that for yourself and for contemporary composers. You don't see much of it. But, you know.
Well, I feel like continuing to study with other artists, people further down the road with you, can help with that. And just trying to play with artists you might not usually play with.
That's very good. Yeah, that's good. You were asking me something, and I interrupted.
Oh, well, like, I was just from C to E to B to D sharp.
Oh, yeah.
And actually, I felt like I was truly hearing it as a D sharp, not an E flat.
Maybe you were. If you felt that, by God, you did.
Well, because then I would try and flip it down to that.
Yeah, but reciprocal harmony is a lot harder. That's why we like it. I think that because you burn more calories figuring out flats than sharps. That's why we like this. You know, when we have a typical cadence, we add flats. We go reciprocal. You know. And then it gets easy. It goes over tonal again. Oh, that's nice. So I think it takes more energy for the brain to actually decode what's happening when things are upside down. It's easier to hear this than that.
Yeah.
It's easier to hear a fifth than a fourth. It's easier to hear this than it is to hear this. Which is this upside down. Then it's this upside down is this. So my theory is that if you write enough reciprocal harmony, you'll lose weight. Because, you know, you burn more calories.
Yeah. It's like dividing is more difficult than multiplying.
Yeah, dividing's harder to conceptualize than multiplying. Yeah. And so it's just harder to decode reciprocal harmony. And that's one of the reasons it's used for tension, for the plot thickens, and then when you go to overtonal harmony, it gets resolved again, more clear. So to hear D sharp is one thing. To hear its reciprocal, which is what? B. I don't even know. Third, fifth. Wait a minute. It's 2/3. It's a fifth and 2/3. A fifth and two. Yeah, it's B double flat. I thought so. It's B double flat. Forget it. In the key of C. Although there's an example in my book of B double flat, a B double flat A natural diasis. That's almost. These are cuspy things. We're talking pretty advanced harmony.
Well, could you talk about, maybe give a brief explanation of commas and talk about
no. It's not. It can't be too brief.
Well, what about
you have to say what a comma is first, and conceptually what it is. A comma is two things which are mathematically very, very close, which nevertheless are disparate. They are not the same. They're in different realms, but they seem very, very close.
Such as,
for instance, if you take. Well, okay, this is what Pythagoras figured out. If you take the number 3 and multiply it times itself 12 times, you'll get a certain number. 53,000 something. And if you take the number 2 and multiply itself times itself, 2 to the, I think it's 17th, no, it's 2 to the 19th, I forget. you'll get a very, very close number. But the realm of prime numbers are distinct, disparate.
Yeah.
So the answers you get when you multiply 3 aren't in the same realm as the answers when you multiply 2. So those numbers are very close, more or less 53 to 52, but up in the thousands. And so Pythagoras thought that it's like two ellipses which come like this. They come really close, like ships that pass in the night. They don't touch. They're from different worlds.
Yeah.
It's like falling in love with an alien. Okay,
yeah. And you greet each other almost.
And that's but no different. So goodbye. So those two things that in music, you can have tones which are very, very, very close together, but they're pitch-wise, but they're very different harmonically, like D sharp and E flat, for instance, or many pairs, and that's what the lattice shows. Anyway, I can't do it briefly. Yeah. So when you have two tones that are very close together in pitch, but that show very different things, or I shouldn't say that show, but feel very differently in the body when you hear them, in the psyche when you hear them, and what the distance between those two tones in frequency, that is the interval between them, is when that's very small, that's a comma. And then in equal temperament, you have all these notes that are generated by perfect fifths and major thirds reduced to 12 notes, none of which are the exact pitches that you think you're hearing. So if you go to a group of people and you say, sings this note, and then now everybody make a harmonious chord, people will sing blah, blah, sing blah, blah. That'll just come out. And then I'll say, well, I'll play it on the piano. And that's not what it is. Yeah. It's something else. This is pretty close. That's pretty screwed up. That's sharp.
Oh, sharp. Yeah, sharp. It should be flat.
It should be flatter. It's 14 cents sharp, which is, substantial. You can really hear it. It's grating, but does that mean that it's not a C major chord? Of course it's a C major chord. Duh. Have you ever seen a circle? That's a circle, right? Wrong. You've never seen a circle. Is this circular? No, it isn't, but it's close.
It's very close.
So we take it for that. Is this a perfect fifth? It's really close. So it sounds like, is that a major third? No, but we take it as a major third. So, but I can also make that sound like something completely different. I can make it sound like B sharp and E, a diminished fourth, by doing this. That sounds different. That on the piano sounds very different than that's different music. But
and that's an example.
And it would be different pitches if I sang it in tune. But on the piano, I can use this as either thing, and so I've broken the comma in my language. In other words, I can use this as either thing. This. So different because of the context, and so it's exactly like an English pun, right? And what I always say is, two, the word two means so many different things.
Desmond Tutu
has two tutus. It's just quite a coincidence. I have two tutus too, and that makes the two of us have two tutus et tu, Desmond Tutu. So I'm saying all these different phonemes in different contexts, and it's kind of funny. And in English, it's a groaner, right? But in music, it's a swooner. Yeah. We love to hear it. Yeah. Here's an example. Here's the note. It's the black note between G and A. And I'll make it sound like G sharp. on an F minor chord. Now, if you sang those things in tune, they'd be really, really different pitches. Actually, almost a quarter tone apart, 42 cents apart. They're very different. The G is lower than the A. G sharp is lower than the A flat by a lot. But on the piano, that black note stands for either thing thanks to Bishop Tutu's tutu, right? Because context decides meaning. Context decides meaning. That's why equal temperament works. So that's one thing. So it's just different music, different feeling, different quality. Even though it's the same lever on the piano, it's a different meaning, and it would be tuned differently by singers singing in tune or players playing in tune. So when one thing substitutes for the other, I'll go to I'll make it an E7, and I'll change it into an A flat. So I'll do it a little more musically. It's just really pretty harmony. It's just very pretty. We go, oh, swoony. That's nice.
It shapeshifts in front of you.
It's a shapeshifter, literally a shapeshifter. And so what turns out to be the villain, I say the beauty of the beast in my book, what turns out to be the villain, the toxic thing, oh, you changed the meaning, don't do that. It's something that's very beautiful to us in equal temperament. Nobody knew that was going to happen when they started to temper the scale, but then gradually, revolutionarily, it was discovered. And it became the reason the 19th century sounds like the 19th century. And it just was, composers discovered it, starting with Bach, and it just became the name of the game, but it never was very clearly described. I think I'm the first person to describe the mechanism of that really completely, which is another thing that sort of pissed me off. Like, look, I may have been standing in the right place at the right time, but why couldn't I have just read my own book when I was 20?
Because that's what I had to do.
That's what you did.
Yeah. So, like, what am I doing when I demonstrate this to students? I'll take the B string on the guitar and I'll excite the second harmonic, the fifth, right, the 3 to 2, right, and then I'll
B F sharp,
right, and then I'll excite the 5 to 4 F sharp on the D string.
Oh yeah, and then they're different.
They're different. That's a common.
But it depends on how you're tuning the B and the
if they say they're in, I guess.
Yeah, the B has to be in tune with the G, and the G has to be in tune with the D. So when you make this on your guitar, that G chord, here's the strings. That's the guitar strings. When you do that, it has to be in tune. So that has to be a true major third. That has to be a true fourth.
Okay.
Right.
Say they are.
And say they are. Then that's the diasis comma.
Cool.
Yeah. That's good. That's a good way to do it. And the diasis? No, I said
F sharp. Well, it's dimic, isn't it?
Dimic comma. Yeah. Oh, we're not talking about the D. Oh, we're talking about that. Yes, it's dimic comma. Yeah.
It's long. It's not up and it's not tall.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the difference between 4 perfect fifths and 1 major third. If you go, it's different than. It's a different note, but same on the piano. So we've lost 90% of the audience.
Yeah. Well, let's bring it back to. I mean, what about like we're talking about harmony, we're talking about relationships of notes, but in my musical world that I'm spending time with, I mean, people make noise. There's like a lot of noise, a lot of, hanging out with timbre for 40 minutes.
Oh, electronic noise.
Sure.
Distortion is the name of the game.
Well, how do you? I mean, because you mentioned you used to play free jazz.
Still do.
Still do.
I don't call it free jazz. I just play what I play. But I've been hugely influenced by Cecil Taylor and Crowd.
Well, what's your aesthetic compass in regards to music that does not have clear tonal relationships or boundaries and is I don't know, it's more like you're playing with blocks of sound or you know, trying to beautify noise, which I've experienced in a very beautiful way. But it's a funny thing because I don't know how you bring a sensitivity to making noise is fascinating because a lot of time I just want to walk out of the room. But if it's done well, it can be done well. Noise can be very beautiful, or non-periodic, you know, waveforms. How do you feel about non-periodic waveforms?
It was a three-part answer. First part, I'd rather have a guy on stage with his amp turned up to 11, his guitar pointed at me and making the most excruciating sounds than a guy up on stage pointing a machine gun at me and shooting me. I have a distinct preference for the first thing. And even though there might be a fine line between those two things, I really do prefer the first thing. The second part of the answer is, there is absolutely no zero objective standard for art. Mm-hmm. You cannot say what art is. That's a specious question, and it has no beneficial answer. Art is what you need in your life at that particular time to shape it. Mm-hmm. Period. You know, you can carry an empty frame, a picture frame around and lay it on the ground, and every time you lay it on the ground, it's a picture, right? And you could say, well, I don't even need the frame, which is true. You don't even need art. You don't need the definition of art. It just, the more you examine it, the more it just vaporizes. You can't do it. On the other hand, so the old saw is, I don't know what art is, but I know what I like. Yeah. That's true. That's just true. That's the reason it's funny. And I mean, I know what I like, and I wouldn't say that this or that anything you make that you say is art, I wouldn't say that it's not art. I just can't do that. Uh-huh. The root of the word is artificial from the Greek.
Which always sort of bummed me out.
Yeah, which is, this makes a specious distinction between what is natural and what's artificial, right? Hey man, if I'm nature. I don't care how clever I am and what kind of machine I build or how I choose to blow up the world. I'm still nature. Come on. So, you know, that was an Aristotelian distinction, which may be beneficial if you're discussing aesthetics, but that's why I don't discuss aesthetics. Mm-hmm. I'm an artist. I don't have time. The third part of the question is what is my own proclivities, and you know, I like what I like. I like calm music. Mm-hmm. I love Bartók when he's modal and not showing the terrors of World War II and his displacement as a citizen and the slaughtering of his family. Mm-hmm. I don't have to hear that. My family was slaughtered in the Holocaust. I don't want to hear that in a damn string quartet. Thanks. I lived that. Mm-hmm. Okay? Enough. Yeah. I love my Bartók, but I don't like that Bartók. Mm-hmm. So one of the most absolute peak experiences of my life was stoned on acid, listening to the Grateful Dead, and they got so far out. I mean, it was really, the distinction between this and that just went away. I couldn't call it music. I know where I was and what was happening. It was fabulous. It's like a touchstone in my life, you know. And the thing is, everybody was stoned. It was just the whole room was in this place that was so beyond normal experience, you know. But the reason we do that is because that is normal experience. It's just a parameter we aren't usually sensible about or sensitive to.
Well, being in a room full of people on acid, you know, I wish that was more normal, but I don't think.
Well, whatever. However that works out in your life. But what I'm saying is that there's a lot of anger and anxiety in the world. Mm-hmm. And suffering, and it's very understandable. In my life, there's a certain amount of aggression and a certain amount of anger, and there's a great deal of peace and gratitude, and that my music shows that. Mm-hmm. But I can listen to other music that has tremendous rage in it,
Yeah.
and terror and aggression, and I can appreciate it for what it is. I can understand the person making that music in a way that I wouldn't have been able to in any other way. And like I said before, I'd rather he was making that music than throwing bombs at me.
Well, indeed, it sort of pacifies the psyche, or it's almost, art is like the safest place to put these more challenging, violent, aggressive impulses. You put them in art, and then they're placated, they're calmed, they're assuaged
and
for a time.
And they're shared.
Yeah, and they're shared. They're seen, right?
They're exposed. And they're acknowledged.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And that it's better to acknowledge it that way than to bury it and increase its toxicity.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a good question, and we made a great answer.
I think so. I think so. Gosh, what else on your mind, man?
Practice what you love.
What if you haven't been practicing piano? You've been writing.
Yeah. I can't do everything, and the chops go out, and then it takes 5 days to get them back.
Yeah.
So come back in 5 days. I'll play better for you.
This is great though. I've been practicing a lot, and like talking about studying with other teachers. I've been studying with this guitarist named Peter Mazza, and it's been very insightful. And like, I don't know, I'm also injured, man. I've been injured for like.
I know. It's when you're studying with me, you're having problems.
That was there, and then I went away, and then this is something else. And like, I'm just forever tight. I've been like a wounded bird for.
Do you know a guitarist who's not a wounded bird?
Nah.
No.
In fact, one time on acid, I had this vision of me as a wounded bird in my wings, and yeah, it's been like 2.5 years. But it's funny because when I'm playing my guitar, it doesn't matter. It's when I'm not playing that I feel I'm wounded.
Yeah, but that's dangerous.
Is it?
Yeah.
Well, I practice safe, and I
practice safe.
Yeah.
But I keep telling people, don't practice into pain.
No way.
Yeah.
No, thank you. Yeah. Shall we call it? Yeah. All right. Thank you for tuning in. Yeah. Thanks for listening. Once again, WA Mathieu. Thank you so much, brother.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good work you're doing.
I hope so, man.